Yes. Okay. Now, rewriting history of women in Islam is as important as rewriting women's history in general. It attempts to redefine the subjectivity of women, to read and tell the story of humanity through women's perspective, experience, and language, alongside men. Hajar is one of the pillars of Islam's consciousness, who rise high in its women and men's imagination of faith, strength, and active submission. These are simple introductory words to the topic, but the real question is, what does Hajar mean to women and to Islamic culture at large? How did she participate in building Islam as we know it today? The answer may vary from one person or one generation to another. But with you, I'm going to give Hajar the voice she has been denied alongside history, to explore the different aspects of the significance of Hajar's personality, life, heritage, and her story from as many angles as possible, the imagined and the historical. Then I leave it to you to add up what you find is most touching your heart. So let's get started. Now, Sayyida Hajar, yes, you can move to the next slide. Sayyida Hajar, who was called also Hagar, Agar, is thought to have come from Farma, Pelusium, which is modern Port Said, east of Sinai at the entrance of Egypt. She is a person that belonged to many traditions and beliefs, including Egyptian, Arab, Jewish, polytheism, monotheism, and Islam. She's also been claimed by Nubians. Hajar is known to be the Egyptian handmaiden, slave, wife of Ibrahim, Abraham, the prophet, or father of prophets, the founder of monotheism. She bore him his first son, Ishmael, under the request of Sarai, Sarah, the official wife and cousin of Ibrahim, who gave her to Ibrahim to be a wife for procreation purpose after the couple aged without conceiving. Hajar's legacy shrouded and overwhelmed by legend and history. It is continuing to inspire, this legacy is continuing to inspire gender and theology studies of Jews and Muslims, let alone of inspiring modern Muslim women of her example and what she represents. Missing any historical record, similarly to many prophets and their consorts, she is vividly present in the memories of extra history of both nations, Hebrews and Arabs, from two different and opposite angles. Her story comes in part from the Jewish tradition of the Old Testament, of Torah and Midrash, which is Jewish ancient exegesis. In another part, it comes from the Islamic traditions, including the Hadith, the exegesis, and history, especially the Israelite traditions or Israeliyat. Although the Old Testament predates the Quran for centuries, some of the Jewish accounts came later than the Islamic ones in a dialectic way. It's important in this context to realize that we are not addressing a historic figure following the known historical methodology. In this attempt to rewrite women's history in Islam, we are dealing with a figure in a different genre that gained its quasi-historical authenticity and power of being from the symbolism of the sacred and oral tradition. Moreover, these stories are located in the domain of faith that is difficult to quantify or measure. According to tradition, Hajar has many backgrounds. One is calling her a handmaiden, and that was given to Sarah by the Pharaoh, king of Egypt, as a gift. Others consider her as a princess and a daughter to the Pharaoh who wanted to honor his daughter by living with the blessed family of Abraham. A third opinion is that she was a daughter of the Pharaoh from a concubine. So she became Sarah's maid and was also called a slave and Ibrahim's wife. All of these are just different interpretations of her role and where she is located or situated. The biblical story goes on that during the short dwelling of Abraham and Sarah in Egypt, the Pharaoh, after cutting there was a long story about that, gave Hagar Hajar as a slave to Sarah. And after waiting for so many years, Sarah gave her maid to Abraham to conceive or to have a child from him. Once Hajar conceived, then the power relations changed, and Hajar received the jealousy of Sarah, and which became very unbearable and abusive, that forced her to run away. Hajar, however, returned under the advice or order of the angel who prophesied of her giving birth to a son called Ishmael, who will become leader of his people. Thereafter, she gave birth to Ismail, the firstborn son, as we said, to Ibrahim. As a miracle, Sarah was able to conceive as well at an old age and gave birth to Isaac. Sarah's jealousy continued, but it took another form, which is the fear that Hagar's son would become the heir to the prophethood and the heir to the land that Ibrahim has claimed over Palestine. So Sarah asked Abraham openly to get rid of Hajar and her son. Abraham did as she asked him to do and sent Hajar away with a sack of water and her son on her back to the wilderness of Paran or Bir Sab'a, which has been identified by many scholars as the mountains or the wilderness of Mecca. According to the Old Testament, Hagar went alone with her son, but according to the Islamic accounts, Ibrahim is said to have accompanied her. They walked or rode, it's not very clear, but one story said that they rode the Buraq until they reached the valley of Mecca, which is about between, you can put the next slide, which is about 14 to 1200 kilometers from Al-Khalil, Hebron, to Mecca, where they lived. The Islamic accounts added the story of cutting the limbs, that Sarah vowed to cut 3 limbs of Hagar or Hajar, which became the first to have pierced ears and circumcised. And this is another story. Then in the wilderness, and here we're going on, continuing the Old Testament story. In the wilderness, there were 2 accounts with different responses by Hagar or Hajar. While she was passive and submissive in the biblical sources, she was portrayed as proactive in the Islamic accounts. In the Genesis 16, she appears as crying out to God and waited for her son to die. It wasn't until, and then the angel came from the sky and she heard him speaking to her, comforting her, and then a well of water burst from the ground. But at the same time, the angel spoke to her again. He professed that her child will be and that God will make him into a great nation. When the Islamic story, according to the Islamic account, as they arrived to Mecca, Ibrahim started on his way back. Hajar ran after him, grabbed and clung to his robes, asked him to whom they were left to in this desert. He kept on walking and reading the famous verses known in Surah Ibrahim, رَبِّ اجْعَلْ هَذَا الْبَلَدَ آمِنًا. Next slide. بيجعل هذا البلد آمنا واجنبني وبني أن نعبد الأصنام. Oh Lord, make the city worship of idols. Not hearing what the prayer was about, Hajar understood that he has left them under the order of God. His only answer to her was yes when she asked whether it was God who ordered him to do that. At this realization, she immediately stopped following him and said, then he will not abandon us, and returned to her son and destiny. You can follow on the next slides. So they are all about the verses. As he reached Kida Crease, he said another prayer. Our Lord, I have settled some of my offspring in a barren valley near your sacred house, our Lord, so that they may establish prayer. So make the hearts of believing people incline towards them and provide them with fruit. So perhaps they will be thankful. And continued on his route. Quran gave a vague image of Hajar, referred to her indirectly as it does with most of prophets and prophet consorts. Ibrahim's prayers were clearly referring to her and his offspring as he was leaving them in that deserted place. In the middle of nowhere, Hajar had only a sack of water and some dates or bread. As the provision ran out, her son started to cry. The Islamic story gave a different description of how she went about looking for any hint of water. Where in the biblical account, she sat opposite her son crying and watching him dying. In the Islamic tradition, mainly the tradition narrated by Al-Bukhari, she ran and climbed on the hills to have a better view of any sign of living, but she saw nothing. Then she saw a mirage as she climbed the mount, known later as a Safa, but there was nothing as well. She tried to listen to any sound, but silence was everywhere. She went back walking and running until she found another mount, which is later known as Al-Marwa. She climbed it, but in vain, nothing except mirage and silence. She followed it again and again for 7 times, until she lastly heard the laughter instead of the crying of her son. And someone was speaking to her and guiding her back to her son. It was the angel, who then scratched the ground with his wings, and the water burst with Zamzam, which came from under her son's feet. So that was the story, the Islamic story of how she reacted to the abandonment. There is here a paragraph that I have dedicated to speaking to angels, which was very remarkable in both the Islamic and the biblical accounts, that I will leave for later, but it was very important and significant for later on significance. Now, according to the biblical story, she has settled in Paran, which has been identified, as we said, with Mecca, and she taught her son how to use the bow for hunting, and then she got him away from Egypt. Whereas the story in the Islamic account goes that after she settled, a migrant tribe called Jurhum passed by the valley as they were immigrating from Yemen to the north. And while they were passing by, they saw some birds flying. So they expected there was water in the area. And as they knew that that area before, as it was part of their caravan route, they were astonished to see this sign of water. And then they found Hajar and her son, and they immediately went and asked permission from her to drink from the water and maybe even to settle nearby. The Islamic history narrated the story as the tribe settled in Mecca after they took the permission of the owner and the mistress of the place. This is how she was described, Hajar. Her leadership qualities were definitely to add to the submission of Jurham to her condition. Her condition was that they can settle there, but the water is hers. The accounts relate to Jurham as well, that they taught Ismail how to use the arrow. Later in life, Ismail married from that tribe. Now, if you want to imagine how her life was, that would be that is left to the imagination of everyone. But there are things that are straightforward. Now, God has assured her by the messenger that she will be all right. She found a survival source, which is water. But after that, there was something more that she has to do. The real work started afterwards, since she had to build a shelter, to build a home, to build a life. She needed to protect herself and her child from the wilderness, with what it brings of dangers, wild animals, of weather impact, etc. She needed to find survival provision of food. She must have gone to the primitive ways of looking for food, probably collecting what she finds on trees, if there were any. Hunting was another option, as it was mentioned in both the biblical and Islamic accounts that Ismail was a hunter and knows how to use the bow. It's evident that it was she who taught him the art of that he grew up as he grew up, and helped her out with it. It's evident that it was she who, She must also have used the art of building fire and cooking whatever she could hunt or collect. The Nubian accounts, which claim the root to their culture, use the hunting of bows as a sign of affiliation to their culture that Hajar must have learned from before she was given to Ibrahim. Her relationship to the tribe of Jurham in the story doesn't add up until we imagine, and which makes sense, that she was well settled and had already had her proper shelter and perhaps a garden, using well of Zamzam and the dam that she built upon it, connecting it perhaps to canals to her cultivated space. It must have been in this context that Jurham communicated with Hajar and asked her to let them use her water and to settle nearby. She approved What is remarkable about this encounter was the peaceful settling of Jurham by the side of Hajar. They asked for the permission and accepted her conditions without any exercising of power. It is amazing to picture an entire tribe of hundreds of strong men with their families asking for the permission of a single mother with a child living on their own in the desert by a well without forcing themselves on the place and seizing the well for themselves and taking advantage of Hajar's vulnerability. It's very clear that the tribe was following the Arab tradition that forbids an attack on women. And also they followed the tradition of respecting the ownership of wealth, even if there was a grand discrepancy in the size of power of the two parties. The respect to the conditions Hajar continued, the respect of the conditions of Hajar continued until the two groups were united by the marriage of Ismail to one of their daughters. However, the ownership of the well and the land continued in the lineage of Ismail. I would like to say a few things about the idea of exile. Hajar appears as a powerful figure in the Islamic heritage of a young woman who suffered of exile. She experienced many types of exile, firstly from her own home country, Egypt, as a handmaiden in an abusive house of a prophet in Palestine. Secondly, in exile from Palestine to the deserted land of Mecca. And psychologically, she was also an exile of the human community. How much pain did she suffer? How much oppression did she witness? How did she learn to survive and to carry the burden of seeing her child dying before her eyes? No one knows. We only try to step in her feet. Fortunately, her profound faith in God was rewarding, and she was saved with her child by the divine intervention and the burst of Zamzam well in the arid place. However, she was still left to build her own life alone for years and years to come until her son was able to help her in her daily quest for living and providing. The advent of Jurham tribe and their settling by them was assuring and challenging at the same time. It helped her to build a social life for her son, but she was also alert of losing her ownership of the water and the land, as her son lost his inheritance to his half-brother Isaac in Palestine. Luckily, the Jurham tribe respected the convent of water among the Arabs and kept their distance and observed Hajar's condition that the water was hers. Rifat Hassan associates Hajar with the idea of exile through the etymology of her name, Hajar, and Hijra, or going into exile for the sake of God. Now, I'll move to another part of the history of Hajar in the Islamic accounts, as more details come both from Hadith tradition and from the late Midrash of Rabbi Eliezer of the 8th century. It goes on that Ibrahim went back to Paran, Mecca, 2 or 3 times. That Ibrahim's first return was after Ismail married his first wife, which Ibrahim didn't like, and Ismail consequently divorced. This means it was after about maybe 15 or 20 years. The second time was when Ismail married his second wife, and also from the tribe of Jurham, with which Ibrahim was happy this time, which signifies the importance to consolidate choosing a fitting wife to ensure the descendants line that will encompass the Prophet Muhammad centuries or millennia to come. His third visit, which was a few years later when Ismail reached 30, was to fulfill Ibrahim's covenant to God of building the Kaaba, the shrine of God, but also to fulfill the offering, slaughtering, sacrifice of his adult son, who was then redeemed with a ram. Although she might have still been living, the 3 stories of Ibrahim's return do not refer to Hajar. The Islamic accounts are also mixed regarding the time, how many visits Ibrahim did, but that doesn't make any difference. Hajar died in Mecca and was buried inside the borders of Kaaba, which was built by Ibrahim and Ismail, in the area known today as Hijr Ismail. You can move to the following slide. I think there is a photo of Hijr Ismail. No, the following. No, the one. Anyway, it was before. before that. Okay, it's all right. Yeah, here. So the Hijr of Ismail was officially considered to be part of the Kaaba, but it's not walled and not at the moment not part of the Kaaba, but it is in the according to the tradition of the Prophet. It is. It's also where Ismail was later buried, next to his mother. Her tomb place shows that she was alive when Ibrahim and Ismail rebuilt the Kaaba. Now this was actually the story from both sides, as brief as possible, with few commentary as you have seen. But the second part of this lecture is to do with the analysis and how we analyze the significance and the role of Hajar, as well as what she represents to Muslim women and Muslims in general today. Hajar, okay, you can go to the analysis slide. Yes, this one. The survivor and the abused. The symbolism of Hajar's biography in hagiography in Islamic tradition and memory is multifaceted. She represents the female survivor in her highest level, the abused, oppressed, the abandoned, who fought and prospered. Not only that, but her descendants became or become a notable people of their own merit. Her faith she also symbolizes the sincere faith, the faith strength when it submits to God, and when it blocks any resistance to accept the will of God and to believe fully in the fair outcome. Faith that is interweaved with patience and strong will to build again her life and support her child. She's a victor who, with the help of God and her own initiative, is able to transform a wilderness into the cradle of a new world dedicated to the fulfillment of God's purpose on earth, which is al-amara, or to be the Khalifa on earth, a true Khalifa. Another aspect of Hajar's symbolism is her image as a fighter. She represents the woman fighter who doesn't give up to natural disasters. She kept on marching and running and climbing mountains and looking for hope without cessation. Her act of positive response to her abandonment became the emblem of how people believing women should pursue their lives, their work, and their dreams by resilience and resistance. It became part of Muslims' ritual of one of the main 5 pillars of Islam, the pilgrimage. Hajar Sa'i, or march, became the ritual that Muslims, men and women, through time since the year 630 CE, which is the year of opening Mecca, have been following every year. At every pilgrimage and at every Umrah, when visiting the Holy Mosque in Mecca, the practice of her marching, running, has been performed by billions of people for billions of times. Sa'i, which is translated by the pursuit of work and life, is completed in 7 times between the Safa and Marwa. Marching and running on her footsteps has been going on since the beginning of Hajar's journey till doomsday. Her marching act symbolized the determination, the patience, the strong belief in God as a savior. She became a role model to Muslims everywhere, and to Muslim women in particular throughout time. In brief, her history is intertwined with God's shrine, raised, purified, prayed into, and buried in. I would like also to add something about her other part of identity, her Egyptness. The question raises here as to how many of the above qualities of Hajar are actually of her Egyptian root that brought together all these attributes, values, and trails. It's an argument that Egyptians took up very proudly and more. They consider her a representation of the true Egyptian woman's qualities of faith and determination, strength, obedience of God. She is also the symbol of life compared to the mother goddess who disseminates prosperity and life on anything that she touches, even a barren land. That will lead me to another discussion that is related to Hajar and to her endurance of hardship, her endurance of abuse and abandonment. That has made Hajar to fall into the same roles that prophets prophets fall into and suffer from. This hardship was one of the markers that incited a debate among some scholars, such as Ibn Hazm and others, to suggest that Hajar was a prophetess, similarly to Virgin Mary. Hagar had, as Barbara also said, that Hagar had to endure the distress and danger that have typically marked the careers of God's chosen historical agents. Like God's prophets, Hagar preserved, and thus her name and memory came to be part of Islam's sacred history and ritual. End quote. She was also spoken to by the angels, as I mentioned before. It's another marker of prophets. Her miracle, as every prophet has to have a miracle, her miracle is argued to be that she has received this gift or intervention from heaven by having the spring of Zamzam. Then she was a carrier of Ibrahim's faith in one God. She carried the message of monotheism to Mecca and raised her son to follow it. It was no wonder that when Ibrahim came to meet his son after so many years, he found him obedient to God and a true believer, that he obeyed the oracle of sacrifice. And he told his father, do whatever God has ordered you to do. Believers also followed the steps of Ibrahim and Ismail in their ritual to obey God's order against the whispering of Satan until Ismail was redeemed and the ram was offered in his place. Here I'm talking about the other rituals of Hajj, which are the stoning of the Satan and then ending the Hajj or the pilgrimage by the slaughtering and sacrifice. The sacrifice story became the core of the rituals of pilgrimage afterwards in Islam and before Islam. Building the Kaaba situated the ritual of circumbalance, let alone that Hajar's running or marching or pursuing between Safa and Marwa was also part of this ritual. From a literary point of view, there was an intersexual study done on the Old Testament and compared Hagar and Ibrahim and the references to them. It found out that Hajar or Hagar is portrayed in a manner that compels us to see her as a matriarchal figure on a part with such figures as Abraham, and that like Abraham, she receives God's promise of a son, but must undergo the terrifying ordeal of almost losing that child. The other issues that the story of Hajar brings up is the issue of the format of the ideal family in the Islamic imagination and laws. According to Amina Wadoud, the Islamic family law dismissed the example of Hajar's life and experience on many levels. One of them was the fact that she was abandoned in the desert with her child as a homeless single parent. Such a status is totally absent in the structure of the Islamic society and family, which looks at the ideal family as composed of only man, woman, and children. Never had they addressed the single parent as a possibility or as a proper family. The other aspect is the provision for the family, which is usually bragged upon and fought for in the family power relations, where the man is considered the qawwam, the protector, the provider. Hence, he is entitled to power and authority on his wife and household. Whereas in the case of Hajar, she was the head of her own household. Abraham or Ibrahim disavowed of his responsibilities as a provider of to his family under the justification that he was ordered by God, according to the Islamic accounts. What Woodward noticed is that Hajar's unique status did not raise any debate or questions or reflection among the legislators of Islamic family law. They didn't consider it as an example set by God to reflect upon or to consider a solution of support for. In the building of during when they were building the Islamic society. The consequence was that the single mother in an Islamic context and probably in other pre-modern contexts too was an outcast, neglected and left on her own, missed on the ideal Islamic structure of takaful, or social solidarity and compassion among its members. Learning from the lesson of Hajar, women should never be abandoned. The networks of societal support are essential to build a sane, moral society. That make us move, as we are speaking of motherhood, that and the sacred opens new realms of what it might mean in Islam, in Judaism, Christianity, or in ancient times, or even in modern times. Hajar and Sarah opened this door, the door of the door of pre-creation, of creation, of birth and death. What is a woman's role, after all, to be a childbearer or a breadwinner? Other aspects of Hajar's symbolism, or not symbolism, but her story raises also another issue, which is the issue of race and class in cultural relations. What is surprising is that the image that the Old Testament portrays for the relation between Sarah and Hajar and the discrimination and abuse she suffered from under her hands and under the eyes of Ibrahim as well, such a portrayal doesn't correspond to suit the image of prophets or prophet's household. I just question that all. And if this was happening in the household of a prophet, what is the situation like in other houses and families? And that will lead to the question of slavery, an issue that, again, Amna Wadud explored in depth in relation to Islamic tradition. In this process, there was the debate of whether Hajar was an African princess, concubine, spouse, given to Abraham, or just a slave given by his wife or to his wife. And if so, where did the cultural practice known in the past that any offspring resulting from the liaison of the master with the slave woman, Hajar in this case, becomes heir of a household ruled by Abraham and Sarah. This tradition is not understood today, nor recognized and neglected from discussion. And this question actually brings in the whole debate about slavery in Islam and how Islam looks at slavery and how much it's been abolished from historical slavery. The last point I want to make here is about race and kinship. When reflecting on the notion, when reflecting on the nation people who descended from Ismail, the issue of race and kinship comes up as one realizes how much it is complex. For the Arabs who descended from Ismail in 12 branches of sons were the outcome of the melange of the three main ancient civilizations of that time: the Mesopotamian, represented by Ibrahim, the Egyptian, represented by Hajar, and the Yemeni Arabs, represented by the Jurhumi wife of Ismail. Moreover, the question of race purity finds its challenge in this triad of races that formed the Arab race in Arabia. Similarly was the language spoken in Mecca. Ismail must have grown up speaking his mother's tongue and later learned Arabic from Jurhum. It's not clear whether he knows Hebrew, since there was, or Akkadian in this, because Ibrahim must have been speaking Akkadian, since there was no one speaking to speak it with. But perhaps Hajar taught him few words that helped him when his father visited later in the years. Mecca can therefore be considered as the melting pot where race, ethnicity, and language intersected to produce a plural people in a plural land. You can move to the following slides. Okay. Lastly, Hajar in Mecca became an independent being, a free woman, a head of her household, a leader of her own town, a matriarch of a people, of a faith, a founder of Mecca, the founder of Mecca. I would like to end up, you can go to the last slide. Yeah. No, following. Next. Yes. I'd like to end with Mohja Qah's postcards from Hajar, which she wrote in her Hajar poems, where she wrote a note to Sarah, where Hajar is writing a note to Sarah, and at the end she said, P.S. I have decided to found a nation. And that's all. Assalamu alaikum. You can next slide. Thank you all. If there's any question, I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hatoon ALFASSI, for a thoroughly interesting and engaging lecture. We can now begin to receive questions, comments, and reflections from the audience. There is a chat box, so you can feel very free to put your comments, thoughts, reflections in the chat box, and I will try and collect them from there and put them to Dr. Hatoon. You can also raise your hand. There should be a hand raising function, and we can also take questions that way. Just bear with me while I just stop sharing so that hopefully everyone can now see each other, and hopefully also start my video. There we go. I can see some familiar faces, some friends, colleagues. So assalamu alaikum to everybody. And a hand. Yes, so we can see Professor Salman Sayed with a hand up. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mustafa. Can I just say, I think it's an absolute delight to listen to and see Professor ALFASSI for everyone in this. And I really want to say that before I say anything. And thank you for the very interesting conversation. I have a question to ask Professor ALFASSI, if I may. Hatoon, towards the end, you made a claim about the kind of pluralism involved in having these three different lineages. You know, the Egyptian, the Mesopotamian, and the Yemeni. And you kind of said that breaks with the category of race, but throughout your talk, there was a sense in which you kept using the idea of race as something which is continuous in terms of ancestry and lineage, etc. And what I'd like to know is two things. One, is that what you are reporting, or is that a translation, or are you transposing back a modern category of race into pre-Nabatean period and linking up this thing which creates a sense of continuity. And at the last point in your slide, you had this thing about I can't remember now, mother of Arabs and something about Islam. And there's a kind of a conflation between Muslim and Arabness, which I think is interesting in that narrative. And I just wanted to know if you could clarify what is the category of race that you're using, and how are you translating that and what you're bringing into this context.
Okay, nice to see you first, Bobby. And,
it's wonderful to see you, Hatoon. It really is.
Thank you for this complicated question. I forgot which part to answer to, but anyway, I can say what I can say is that if I base my argument on the purity of Arabs, which is one of the basic ideas that Arabness is about, and in relationship to Islam, I find that this triad of relations just challenge it and just break up with it, or it shows that we are kind of imagining there is an imagined pure race, similarly to what similarly to the idea of purity of nations and of blood everywhere, including the Hebrews or the Arabs in this case. And if I've been following certain genealogy in this talk, is just because I was following the accounts, the different accounts. I didn't have the chance to deconstruct each word of them. I was trying just to accept everything as they are for the moment, so I can come to the second part, which is to discuss the symbolism. And here, I think there's still a lot that we can learn from this story that is to be told, and especially when it comes to the idea of race relations. Did I answer your question?
I think so. I think what I was trying to get at was for example, the book by Peter Webb on imagining Arabs, and arguing the kind of the two things. One is that there is a contemporary idea that Arabness as we understand it today is continuous from back when. So that's the first part of it. And the other argument is that, in fact, it's not. So the argument for people like Peter Webb would be that it's not that Arabness then created Islam, but Islam created Arabness, in which case Arabness is not an ethnic or a racial marker. It's actually a marker of a particular project, which makes the point that you're making. But I think some of the narratives that we have around that seem to go back. And there's a comment that you made about Egypt and how in Egypt, but there's a sense in Egypt is considered to be a trans-historical construct, that it says that, you know, from El-Sisi to Hajar is the same kind of, it's a continuous thing. And I think I was trying to get at that whether the concept of race that you were using was really a kind of a translation of these kinds of genealogies, which would have very different connotations, or a transposition from that. That's, I think, I was trying to say that, perhaps not very clearly.
No, it's clear, and I will. I think I should make another maybe another paper on race, on the notion of race and the concept of race that I meant. But as you said, there's a lot to take in from this story and the relations of Hajar, especially when it comes to the fact that, to your point about to what extent Arabness is Islamic as well, or it is Islam, and how much we are linking them together. And I agree that that actually the story of Hajar shows that Arabness is not as understood in history books. And actually, if we go into the early Arab historians, we always see the debate about what are called the Arab al-Ariba wal-Musta'riba, who are the Arabs, the pure Arabs who are the Yemenis, and Musta'riba who became Arabs, which are the descendants of Ismail himself. So there is an admission within the Arabic narrative that actually what we consider it as Arabs, or the tribes that we consider as the pure Arabs, or the more precious Arabs who are the descendants of the Prophet, are actually not the real Arabs. They are actually the combination or the result of these three civilizations and races. Whether they are true races or not, they can be even multiplied. If we look at every version of these three. Okay.
Thank you.
Fantastic, really interesting conversation. Thank you both, Professor Salman, and also for your response, Dr. Hatoon. Seeing questions or reflections coming through in the chat box. So I'll read one. And while I do that, anyone who would like to put their question directly, please put your hand up. So there's from Anisa Musa, who says, women's analysis of this history from Hagar or Hajar's perspective raises the uncomfortable issue around abandonment and single parenthood, which is never represented in traditional male analysis of this story. It's seen as a slander against Prophet Ibrahim. How do we reconcile a critical kind of analytical approach to this this story, and at the same time respect for prophets that Islam would require of us?
As I mentioned, when I look at the story in the Old Testament, I find many parts that make me a bit uncomfortable with the attitudes or responses of Sayyidina Ibrahim. But you don't find this in the Islamic accounts. However, the abandonment is there. No, and you can't deny it in both stories. However, the Islamic account is looking at it in a different way. It's considering it as it had to be done so that the miracle of the faith and the rituals of pilgrimage will be established, and that the trial will be exercised on Hajar. It's like she was a prophetess who had to go through this test to achieve real, or to prove real submission. So this is how it's been. So I think it's possible that the Islamic account is only trying to justify the position of Ibrahim. I don't know, but I mean, the image of Ibrahim together with the whole prophets and Quran, they are all respected, but you don't see the idea of respecting or the concept of respecting a prophet doesn't exist in the Old Testament. You find a lot of criticism, and which is very questionable. This is why I said they need to be questioned.
Thank you so much for that very, very interesting response. We've got, obviously, just for those of you who may not be familiar with Zoom, for those of you who want to use the hand-raising function, it's at the bottom of your screen. You should see reactions, and it's there that you can raise your hand to put a question to Dr. Hatoon. Otherwise, I'm just scanning the room to see if there are any other hands up. So yes, Professor Ziba Mir Husseini, a question from you or a comment or reflection?
Yes, it's both a comment and a question. First of all, Hatoon, it's really great to see you. And thank you for this wonderful lecture. I want to ask a question to the effect that what does Hajar's story tells us about women in, let me phrase it in a different way. I want to ask you to make it explicit, the importance of Hajar's story for women of today. And the fact is that, when we look at the history, it is actually, we always understand the history in the light of our present reality and values. Whether we want it or not, we always project. And I want to ask, what is the significance? What does this story has to offer us in the present? And this is one question that I have. So I want to ask you to make explicit what is implicit in your narrative of Hajar for today. And the second is a question that I know that you have covered it in your work, but the fact is that what does the story that we get from the traditional sources is that women had no rights and no place in society, and when Islam came and they suddenly acquired every right. But in fact, it doesn't tell us much about the pre-Islamic time. And Hajar's story to me actually gives us a glimpse of that pre-Islamic time. So to what extent the image and the history of women that we have in our traditional and orthodox narrative can be backed up by historical data. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ziba, for these very important questions. The first one, okay, what I actually, this was the question of what does Hajar mean to Muslim women today? It was actually my main question that I wanted even also the listeners to share with me. I believe, and I find from going through her story that she can be very much inspiring. Her story inspiring for women today, as a single mother and as a leader, as a provider of her own in her own merit, as a founder of a nation, but also the way that she was able to protect her child, to protect her belongings, and to negotiate her rights, and to make peace, if you would like to say, with a superpower to her, or a powerful entity that is facing her. She had learning how to negotiate is very, very important, I think, in for modern women to achieve. Her story also gives us an inspiration into how to be persistent and how to be proactive towards your dilemmas. The fact that she did not sit still or accepted her fate without any trial is very important in pushing not only women but even men towards building a life without with work and with pursuing work and pursuing breaking all the taboos, all the difficulties that are facing you. So it's a story of survival, and it's important for women today to know that when even if you had the most the unthinkable hardship, that you can still go through it. Yani the hardships that Hajar went through are all unthinkable of, and she was able to come out as a victor, as a survivor, and as a strong woman who doesn't submit. She submits to Allah's will, but she doesn't submit to anything else. And she's also an educator of sons. This is maybe an aspect I haven't mentioned as a symbolism. When women are, they can actually create and build the personalities of strong men as well. It is women who make their sons strong, not the opposite. So I think so these are maybe some of the ideas that can be explicitly expressed, but also what Amna has brought up to the table about women, about single parents, and their position in Islamic law, and how much we need to work on the Islamic family law in order to include the suffer of women in all aspects, especially when they are abandoned by their husbands and society in this matter. Anyway, we can go on for many other ideas as well, and I could leave it to the audience if they have any points to add to it. I'll go to your second question about the Islamic, how much of Hajar's story represents the Islamic women. I think she gives us a very positive image of that is different from the traditional images of women in pre-Islamic times or pre-modern times. It just shows us that women were builders, and they were their relationship to birth and to fertility and to creation and to inventing was continuous since all times. Well, some stories and some social relations are also depicted in this story that are maybe specific to the Akkadian Hebrew context. About the heirs and who has the right to what and to the land, and how you can have a slave that will bear a child, and it will be part of your own household. It's these are all parts of the social structure of ancient societies that the story of Hajar gives us shed some light on, but not necessarily that all of that is not without challenge, because again, the Old Testament is not a historical account. Similarly, nor are the Islamic accounts of when it comes to pre-Islamic stories. These are all oral history that are imagined in different within different perspectives. I hope that I answered your question. Still, I mean, the story of women in pre-Islamic Arabia or pre-Islamic Mesopotamia, Levant, Egypt is open, and studies are just still going on.
Thank you. Yes, you have answered it, and I just want to hear it more from you. To that especially to you what it matters, and you said that, yes, and it tells us everything, and it also shows that we need to reclaim our story and rewrite it, because women's voices were silenced. Thank you.
Yes.
Professor Ziba, let me put you on the spot and ask you, you know, what your immediate reaction was to hearing today's presentation, and thinking about and reflecting on the power and symbolism of Hajjar.
Yeah, I absolutely loved it. You know, she's the one that made Mecca what is Mecca. And the fact is that her being educator of her son, and especially teaching the son the skills that traditionally considered to be male skills. So all these aspects are new for somebody. I'm not a historian. So there, when I was listening to Hatoon, it really reminds me that how much our women and women like Hajar exist in the Quran. But at the same time, the way that the Quran is understood and the role of Hajar is understood in all Abrahamic religions, portrayed by the traditional or the Orthodox narrative, is actually very different from the image that speaks to us. Yeah, so I think Hatoon's work is extraordinarily important. But my question was really to make things explicit in order for Hatoon to speak even more.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that personal reflection. I see a hand up. Aisha Kaji, please feel free to put your question or comment.
Actually, it's been asked already by Anissa, but perhaps to build on that, you know, we often see Muslim women, modern day Muslim women, and indeed through the last few decades, maybe even centuries, portrayed as being essentially submissive, under the thumb of men, etc. And yet we have these examples, not just of Hajar, but also, you know, in the time of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, we have, you know, some of the mothers of the faithful, Hazrat Aisha, Hazrat Khadija, but also, you know, the example I really like to point to, the woman I call the intransigent woman, Khawla, who dared to actually argue and contradict with the Nabi of Allah. And that gives a totally different cast to how women were in the time of the Sahaba, and one hopes immediately after, and how we then came to this construct of the Muslim woman as being submissive, beneath the thumb of the male figures in her life, unable to you know, express her individuality, her freedom, etc., and essentially a constrained human being. And that progression from these very strong women figures back in history, from pre-Islamic times through, you know, all the monotheistic faiths up until the time of the Sahaba and immediately after, and then how we suddenly now end up with these constructs of a totally different type of Muslim woman.
Thank you so much, Aisha, for that contribution. Would you like to respond? I know it was more of a reflection, but feel free to.
Yeah, I just want to say that I agree with you, and there's a problem definitely in reading the stories and the history of Islam, and especially women's contribution to in early Islam. And this is actually what I was referring to at the beginning, that women's history has been silenced, and especially when it comes to Islam, it's not the same. I mean, it's not different from the rest of the world, and we need, as women experts in history, we need at first to learn more about. We need to be more specialized as well. We need to learn the art of that men have learned in order to be able to give our own interpretation and to give voice to these women who have actually done marvelous jobs, challenged the status quo, challenged the powers, challenged the rules, and they were that was okay in early Islam. So I think we have a long way to go. It's true, but I believe that there are lots of strong women and educated and learned women at the moment and in present who are taking this task up.
Thank you so much. So feel free to put any further questions in the chat box. You can raise your hand. While you are thinking, I
would like to ask if it's possible. I'd like to throw the same question I raised at the beginning as to what does the story of Hajar represent to each one of you? How do you how does she speak to you?
Yeah, so I'd like to respond to that first before giving it
Okay.
the privilege of the chair.
Okay.
I guess that,
Yeah.
you know, I can't really see myself doing Hajj and Umrah in the same way again. I think that's something that really, for me, I think now of myself doing tawaf or doing sa'i, and it's just going to be impossible not to think of Hajar based on your findings and your reflections on her life. And that for me, that's one of the immediate things. I also think about some of the very strong women in my family, in particular my mother, and in some ways the legitimacy of her struggle or other women in the family who maybe haven't had the status and respect that they deserve from among the main folk of the family. It gets me thinking about them actually in a new light, because there's something about the struggles of Hajar that really remind me about those women. And you're absolutely right when you say that it's often women who create, through their raising of sons and daughters, but sons especially, who create those qualities that we often just assume are instilled by fathers. So those are my immediate reflections. Anybody else like to share in response to Dr. Hatoon's, and a chance for you to really say how you feel about what you heard today?
Until somebody comes up, I'd
Yes.
like to share with you my experience with in Mecca when I do sa'i and I go between Safa and Marwa. I have the same response every time I go and try to run, even for the short distance that you do in between the two green lights. Yani, we know the story of Hajar. She was running the whole time, and once anybody sees a woman running, it is just as if the sky is collapsing, and you'll see men and women from every angle coming to advise me and tell me this is not the right way to do. Women should not run, only men. And I have to continue running, and while running, telling her, this is Hajar. I'm following Hajar's steps, please. Don't interrupt me. I'm following Hajar's steps. It happens every time.
I can see some comments from the comment box. Fahad Mahmood says, how the sacredness associated with great women of Muslim history is negotiated when it comes to studying them with reference to modern Muslim women's identity construction. I think that's a question. you put it again, Fahd, so I'll try that second one that you put there. How is the sacredness associated with great women of Muslim history negotiated when it comes to studying them with reference to modern constructions of kind of Muslim female identity? I hope.
What is, yeah, but if I understood, I don't know if I understood it well, but I don't see what is the problem here.
Fahad, come on, you've got a microphone.
What's the problem?
Please feel free to put your question directly, maybe re-express
Is there
it.
a problem here?
So if Fahad is there in your time, please feel free to come in and clarify. Anissa, meanwhile, says, everything I run where Hajar ran during Sa'i, a man attempts to remind me that as a woman, I don't have to run every time. Okay, I'm not quite sure I quite got what Anissa's. Anissa, feel free to pop your hand up. Sana, the story of Hajar. So Sana Mehnaz is actually one of our PhD researchers at the University of Leeds. And she was one of the PGR students that was delivering the critical reading group this year. It's great to have her with us. And as I say, today's distinguished lecture also marks the kind of end point of this year's reading group. So Sana, you said that the story of Hajar for you reflects how the struggle and strength of women is overshadowed by the stories of men. We need to retell these stories centering the position of women. Very true. Sana, if you're there and it's comfortable for you to say salam, please do so. It'd be lovely to hear your voice and have a chance to also kind of introduce yourself. But it's a very thoughtful comment, actually, Sana. Thank you for that contribution. Are there any other reflections, comments, questions from the audience? Selective Sunnah, I can see. Don't worry, Sana. Sana is looking after a young one, and that's absolutely fine.
Yeah, of course.
There's a Radia says a selective Sunnah. Interesting. Yeah.
What does she mean? You mean selective? Yeah, of course. This is a problem that again, we have it all the time, that we select what's convenient for us, and for years and for centuries, it was for men only to select whatever they wish from our Sunnah. And it's only today, since women and more women and plenty of women are educated and they can at least read and write and can read for themselves the Sunnah. They can also select. Why not select as well? They can also learn from men how to select from tradition what suits them.
It's a craft. We've got so feel free to put this, Bobby, if you want to, because I think that's a really interesting one. And all right, so I'll put it in the way that I think you mean it, because it's so we know of Patricia Croner's obviously work on Hagarism. And so to what extent do you think Hagarism is actually a useful description for Islam?
Well, you have to, it's important to take all theories into account, but with Crone's position, she's too selective in my view of what to choose from tradition and what to leave. And she has one thing in her mind, is to prove that all the Islamic tradition has come from the Hebrew, from all the Jewish traditions, and she's very open about it. It became very obvious, to the extent that I don't give it. I think we should respond to it as well. But it doesn't mean that we also need to reflect more in a challenged way into our own tradition, but also we need to answer back to to such theories, not in a defensive way, but in a methodological, systematic way.
Go ahead, Bobby. I think you want to come in.
I know someone else is talking. I don't want to take up too much time, but Hatoon, can I just ask, in relation to you, the way you've been talking about a story, and sometimes you talk about history, and of course, you know, there's a whole critique of the historicity of anything that to do with the early period of Islam, etc., and all of that. So I guess the question is this: does it matter if it's a history or it's just a story, and should we care? Does it need to be a history? Can it just not be a story?
No, this question was in my mind when I started writing, and I was very I found it difficult to come to a final decision about how to proceed from here, because I'm a historian and I need, of course, to follow the historical methodology. But at the same time, Hajar's story doesn't respond to any historical evidence. So, but this is why at the beginning I said that I think that the story of Hajar is based in is situated in the realm of faith, as well as the realm of storytelling, realm of oral history, that you don't apply, where you should not necessarily apply the historical methodology on it. Especially that here we're talking about a story that is embedded in the Islamic history and Islamic rituals and everything about Islamic practice, that takes it away from the historicity that some people would like to take it to. And I think that the power, I think it's a very powerful story as it is, and we should embrace it as it is, with all the symbolism that it brings, and it helps and it supports the cause of modern men and women of Islam.
Thank you so much. There's a question, I think a hand up of Christine Baltrop. Please feel free to take the mic.
Hello, Hatoon. Lovely to see you. Hatoon and I go back a long time. I lived in Saudi Arabia. That's where I got to know her. And I feel a total imposter here because I'm a non-academic. But
you're always welcome, Christine.
Thank you, dear. But I've learned so much about the founding of Mecca, and I'm absolutely astounded that it was founded by a woman, which I find very interesting. And also, as a non-Muslim, I think I must be the only non-Muslim in this debate and this lecture. From my culture, Hajjar, or Hagar, as we called her, I mean, she features in the Old Testament, but almost as a sort of side thing, because she was the concubine, and yes, she produced the son, but again, you know, very much in she was then cast out, and we really, you know, she went off, and from what I can remember vaguely was that yes, she founded the Arab race, but did she? I mean, I didn't realize she founded Mecca. Which makes her far more important. And I have just found this really so enlightening, the whole thing. And I'm also very interested in that for some of you, doing the Hajj and Umrah is going to have a totally different aspect on when you do your pilgrimages. Anyway, thank you so much. I just wanted to say that, and I hope to hear more lectures from you, dear. And it's great to see you. And as I said, as a non-Muslim, I find your talks very, very interesting. And thank you.
Christine. Thank you, Christine. It's important to, the importance of Hagar is or Hajar is that she can be identified by not identified, but she can be recognized by all three religions easily, and each of them would talk to her, or each a tradition will talk to her, or she will talk to. And you already know a bit of her struggles and the fact that she was cast out. There's a lot of intersections that took place, and it's taking place between the three religions. And actually, there's been a whole series of studies to commemorate the legacy of both Sarah and Hajar as the matriarchs of Jews and Arabs, or the two religions of Judaism and Islam, and also Christianity. Christianity comes in because you have the Old Testament is part of your book as well.
Yes.
So yeah, and so there are many. After that took part in the since the 90s, such genre of research has taken place, and many studies. It's part of what is called the dialogue between religions that is taking place, I think, until today. And part of it actually is the piece I just the poem that I refer to at the end of Muhja Hajar's poems is a representative of this type of dialogue, because that poem that I used is actually a kind of small postcards were sent from Hajar to Sarah, and then from Sarah to Hajar back, and then from Ibrahim, I think, to also to Hajar. And one of them was when she said, P.S., I decided to found a nation. And it's so funny the way and Sarah here, on the side of Sarah, she was kind of apologizing for what she used to do to her abuse, and that she misses her, and that Isaac misses his brother, half brother, and things like that. And he thinks it's creativity as well is part of this type of dialogue that is important amongst women as well. That is very useful, I find. And Muhja Kaf in her way was very successful, I believe. I recommend her book.
Thank you. Right, I'll see what I can do.
Okay.
So there are a couple of comments I can see. One is from Khurshida. She says that we often read stories in Hadith about other Muslim females, mainly the Prophet's wives, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or their attributes as model figures for Muslims, but rarely do we come across stories about Hajar and her role in Islam. So she's obviously very, very appreciative of today's talk. There's some other comments here. We've probably got to the end point now of our time today. Maybe one more I can read from Anisa Musa. Maryam and Hajar both could be seen as prophets, as some have suggested. Maryam took on a role reserved for men in the temple, and Hajar's actions became institutionalized in Hajj. She raises and teaches the prophets. So some of the things that you have shared with us already. Yeah. I'd like to ask, sorry, after you.
Thank you for raising the question of Hajar being a prophet. But this is one of the untold stories or unthinkable stories. The fact that women could be prophets as well. That you find it difficult actually to talk about in an Islamic context. Even though Muslims since hundreds of years ago discussed it and found the similarities and found markers and signifiers for prophets that could apply to some women, including Sayyida Maryam, including Sayyida Hajar, even including some say even Asya, wife of Pharaoh, even Eve. So it's just an open debate, but there is a very good justifications for to prove that Hajar could be a prophet in her own mirrors.
I would just ask you, what can we expect now? What would be the next stage of this research that you're doing?
Actually, it's all right. Okay, let me tell you the background of this research. It's part of work that I'm doing about women in Islam, that I'm working on them from the beginning of time. So I look at the rereading of their history, starting from Eve up to granddaughters of the Prophet, and up to women readers of hadith and scientists, etc. So this is the part of rereading the history. Another part, I'm working on rereading Quran. So rereading Quran has already been, of course, from the women's perspective and regarding the controversial issues that are mentioned in Quran. And here I'm not the only one, by the way, who's doing this, but just I'm trying to formulate a holistic kind of research that will encompass all of these ideas. So I'm going to looking at the rereading of Quran, then at the rereading of hadith, and then at the rereading of modern women's efforts to and Islamic organizations or Islamic feminism specifically, and how it is dealing with the issue of establishing women's identity and credibility within Islamic context and Islamic laws.
Wonderful. Well, that is fantastic. I can imagine just from today's talk, just how it'd probably be really overwhelming to have what you're doing for Hajar, doing that for all of those other female personalities that you mentioned. It's going to be phenomenal, and we really look forward to seeing the work develop. Mashallah, it's much needed. And I just think about, we've just come out of Ramadan. It's been a time when people have read the Quran, reflected on it, and many of the stories, and they obviously are typically stories of the prophets, Qisas al-Anbiya, and or Sirat al-Nabawiyya, and the Fiqh al-Sirah. And this seems to be what you're doing, which is rectifying what is really a skewed picture. So we thank you greatly for your presentation today, the important work that you're doing. We look forward to future opportunities for conversations with you, Dr. Hatoon ALFASSI. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule for us. This late hour, no doubt. It's probably quite late now where you are.
It's fine. It's fine.
So, thank you to all our guests who have been with us today. There are rounds of, you can see a round of applause. People are using that reaction function there. So there's appreciation all around. And from us at the University of Leeds, I speak for myself, the other colleagues of mine, co-director Professor Salman Saeed is here of the Iqbal Center, and our students as well. We are very, very grateful to you all for joining us today. And look out for future events. You're on our mailing list, so we will be sending you information in due course of future events. And it will be great for us to continue to have these conversations and these fora. So yes, Dr. Hatoon.
Yes, thank you very much, Mustafa, for your coordination, for your moderating this session. Thanks to Bobby, to all the participants who shared with me their views. And since it is the Shawwal, the month of Shawwal. Okay, also I should say Eid Mubarak to everyone, and that I hope that your fasting went smoothly and acceptable by Allah. And I look forward to attend your future lectures as well. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Thank you all. And have a good rest of your evening and a good weekend. And for those of you, the long weekend, it's a long bank holiday weekend. So enjoy the next few days. Allah ma'akum, ma'as salama. Take care, everybody. Thank you so much.